The first time I ever looked another man in the eyes and realized he was about to kill me, instinct took over before conscious thought had a chance. He was no more than 20 feet away, bringing his rifle up toward my position. I drove my weapon onto the target, squeezed the trigger with controlled precision, and landed multiple accurate rounds into his head. He collapsed instantly before he could fire a single effective shot. Moments like that are impossible to explain to anyone who has never stood in combat. They happen in fractions of a second, yet they stay with you for the rest of your life. Long before I ever found myself in a gunfight, I had already made the decision that serving my country would define my life. Looking back now, I understand that my path into military service was shaped by the era in which I grew up. America was producing books and films that honored special operations warriors, and those stories captured my imagination. Motion pictures about naval special warfare operators, along with first-hand accounts from veterans who fought in Vietnam, opened a door into a world that seemed almost unreal. Every page I turned and every film I watched reinforced one thought in my mind. I wanted to become one of those men. My father had served in the United States Navy, but he rarely spoke about his experiences. Our family proudly displayed the American flag on our farm, yet military service was never forced upon me. It was simply respected. Growing up in a small American town, I had almost no exposure to the profession of arms beyond what I found in books and documentaries. I was not raised around firearms. I never hunted, and I was never allowed to own a rifle as a kid. That made the discipline, technology, and professionalism of special operations seem even more fascinating. Those stories became the spark that eventually pushed me to enlist. Nothing can truly prepare a man for basic underwater demolition and naval special warfare training. People hear the name and imagine endless physical punishment, but they still cannot appreciate what it demands until they stand on those beaches themselves. For nearly 9 months, every day became a contest between pain and determination. We were constantly cold. Our uniforms were soaked almost every hour. Sand worked its way into every piece of clothing and every inch of exposed skin. Sleep became a luxury instead of a necessity. Fatigue became normal. Misery became routine. Every instructor pushed us toward the point where our minds wanted to surrender long before our bodies actually failed. The class began with more than 200 determined candidates, every one of them believing he possessed what it took to earn the coveted insignia of a naval special warfare operator. By the time we fought our way through Hell Week, nearly half had already disappeared. Injuries, exhaustion, broken confidence, and voluntary withdrawals steadily reduced our numbers. When graduation finally arrived, only 23 or 24 of the original candidates remained standing. More than 90% of the class had been eliminated. Somehow, I was still there. The physical punishment alone was enough to destroy most men, but the psychological battle proved even harder. A few days before Hell Week began, I fractured my tailbone. Under normal circumstances, any reasonable person would have sought medical treatment and recovery. That was not an option I was willing to accept. I entered Hell Week carrying that injury with me. Every movement became painful. Sitting down was nearly impossible. Traditional physical exercises were agony. Every run, every obstacle, every mile carrying heavy equipment forced sharp pain through my lower back. None of that mattered. Quitting would have haunted me forever. Although our training took place near the end of summer, I have never experienced cold like that before or since. Ocean water stripped every ounce of warmth from our bodies. Wind cut through soaked clothing with surgical precision. Our muscles cramped uncontrollably. Teeth chattered so violently it became difficult to speak. There were moments when I honestly questioned whether my body could continue. Every man reaches a point where the mind begins negotiating with itself. You ask whether another hour is possible, then another minute, then another step. The only way forward is refusing to answer those questions. You simply keep moving. Hell Week lasted 5.5 relentless days. During that entire evolution, we received only about 3 hours of sleep. We covered well over 100 miles while carrying inflatable boats, telephone poles, heavy equipment, and one another whenever someone could no longer stand on his own. The instructors never allowed comfort to exist. Every event blended into the next until exhaustion became the only thing any of us could feel. Sleep deprivation became its own enemy. After several days without rest, your brain begins playing tricks on you. Concentration fades, hallucinations become possible. Simple tasks require enormous effort. Yet the mission never stopped. The instructors expected absolute performance regardless of physical or mental condition. One memory from that week remains burned into my mind. As Friday morning arrived, our commanding officer walked over the sand berm carrying the American flag. He announced that our Hell Week class had officially secured the evolution. Those words struck me harder than anything I had experienced during training. Without thinking, I let out a roar, unlike anything I had ever heard come from my own body. It lasted several long seconds. Every man around me turned to look, probably wondering what had gotten into me. I did not care. At that moment, I felt overwhelming pride. I was just a kid from small-town America with no military background, no family legacy in special operations, and no inside knowledge of how any of this worked. Most people back home never believed I could survive the toughest military selection course in the United States. Standing there after Hell Week proved that determination can overcome expectations. That victory meant more to me than anyone outside that beach could ever understand. Graduation eventually followed, but finishing basic underwater demolition and naval special warfare training was not the end of the journey. We still faced approximately 7 additional months of advanced qualification before earning the right to wear the trident. For nearly a year and a half, my life consisted of non-stop military training. Every phase demanded mastery of new skills: advanced weapons employment, demolitions, communications, combat medicine, maritime operations, reconnaissance, navigation, airborne insertions, survival, and countless tactical drills that had to become instinct under pressure. When I finally completed the pipeline, relief washed over me. Training was over. Now it was time to fight. America was at war, and I had earned my place among the men who would carry that fight directly to the enemy. Completing my training was never the finish line. It was only the beginning. I had earned the right to stand beside some of the finest warriors in the United States military. But now I had to prove that I deserved to stay there. The country was at war, and every mission from that point forward carried real consequences. Not long after joining my operational unit, several teammates and I received orders to deploy to western Iraq, near the Syrian border. Our destination was the small town of Rawa, where we were assigned to establish and reinforce a forward operating base alongside United States Marine Corps personnel. The area was isolated, unforgiving, and heavily influenced by insurgent activity. Every movement beyond the perimeter required detailed planning, disciplined execution, and constant vigilance. Our days followed a demanding routine. Before every operation, we inspected our weapons, tested communications equipment, confirmed medical supplies, reviewed intelligence updates, rehearsed contingency plans, and studied aerial imagery of the objective. Every patrol could turn into a firefight without warning, so preparation was never treated as optional. It was part of staying alive. While serving in Iraq, I experienced the event that ultimately changed the direction of my military career. One of my closest friends, Petty Officer First Class Clark Schwedler, was participating in a direct action raid outside the city of Fallujah. Clark was exactly the kind of man you wanted beside you during combat. He was fearless without being reckless, calm under pressure, and completely dedicated to accomplishing the mission while protecting everyone around him. His professionalism earned the respect of every operator who served with him. During that mission, Clark suffered fatal combat wounds. The news spread through our unit quickly, and the loss hit every one of us with incredible force. Losing a teammate is different from any other kind of loss. We trained together for years, deployed together, trusted one another with our lives, and depended on each other in the most dangerous environments imaginable. Those relationships become stronger than most people outside the military can understand. Clark's death forced me to look at my own future differently. I realized that if I truly wanted to make the greatest possible impact on the battlefield and help protect the men fighting beside me, I needed to challenge myself even further. That decision motivated me to pursue selection for the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, commonly known throughout the military as SEAL Team 6. Selection was unlike anything I had experienced before. Every candidate was evaluated continuously. Physical fitness, tactical decision-making, precision marksmanship, leadership, problem-solving, stress management, and teamwork were tested day after day. The cadre intentionally created chaotic situations designed to expose weaknesses. There was no hiding behind previous accomplishments. Every evolution demanded complete focus because performance alone determined whether you stayed or went home. Eventually, I earned a position within the development group. Serving in that organization meant operating with some of the most capable special operations personnel in the world. Every operator brought years of combat experience, and every mission required complete confidence in the man standing beside you. Trust was everything. No individual could accomplish the mission alone. In May of 2011, our task force participated in the operation that targeted Osama bin Laden. My role was relatively small compared to the overall mission, but I considered it one of the greatest honors of my military career. Months of intelligence collection, rehearsals, contingency planning, aviation coordination, and operational preparation came together during that mission. Every member of the assault force understood exactly what his responsibility was, and every detail mattered. The operation proved what disciplined preparation and teamwork could achieve. Only a few months later, however, our community suffered one of the darkest days in its history. On August 6, 2011, a Boeing CH-47 Chinook helicopter using the call sign Extortion 17 was shot down during combat operations in Afghanistan. 30 American service members lost their lives. Among them were 17 Naval Special Warfare operators, additional Special Operations personnel, members of the flight crew, support forces, and one military working dog. The loss devastated the entire Special Operations community. Nearly one-third of an assault troop disappeared in a single night. These were not simply names listed in an official report. They were friends, mentors, teammates, and warriors I had trained alongside. Their absence could be felt everywhere. Despite the grief, the mission continued. Command leadership decided to rebuild the destroyed assault troop by transferring experienced operators from other squadrons. I was selected to leave Blue Squadron and become part of the newly reformed troop within Gold Squadron. It was the first time our organization had attempted to rebuild a unit in that way. Every squadron had developed its own culture, leadership style, operating procedures, and battlefield habits over many years of combat deployments. Suddenly, operators from different backgrounds had to come together and function as one team without hesitation. We spent countless hours training together. Live fire exercises, close quarters battle drills, helicopter rehearsals, medical scenarios, mission planning, and after-action reviews became part of our daily routine. Trust had to be rebuilt through hard work, repetition, and shared hardship. Eventually, we became a single, cohesive fighting force. Roughly 1 year later, we deployed together to Afghanistan. Our destination was Forward Operating Base Shank, where we immediately resumed combat operations throughout the Tangi Valley. At that time, the Tangi Valley was widely regarded as one of the most dangerous areas anywhere in Afghanistan. The steep terrain gave insurgents natural defensive advantages, while narrow valleys, rocky ridgelines, and isolated compounds created ideal conditions for ambushes. Every mission required careful coordination, disciplined movement, and absolute confidence in the men around you. The valley also carried painful memories. It was the same region where Extortion 17 had been shot down only a year earlier. Every patrol through that terrain reminded us why we were there. We were determined to complete the mission and honor the sacrifice of every warrior who had fallen before us. By early December, our intelligence section began receiving reports about an American physician who had disappeared while working in Afghanistan. His name was Dr. Joseph, and he had entered the country as part of a humanitarian medical mission. He had traveled with several Afghan doctors to provide treatment in isolated villages where medical care was almost non-existent. Somewhere along the way, everything went wrong. The Afghan men traveling with him betrayed the entire group. They handed Dr. Joseph over to Taliban fighters, who immediately recognized his value. They had no intention of killing him right away. Instead, they planned to use him as leverage in future negotiations, hoping to exchange him for captured Taliban prisoners being held by coalition forces. Every hour that passed made the situation more dangerous. Then we received another intelligence update. The Taliban were preparing to move the hostage across the border into Pakistan. Everyone on the task force understood exactly what that meant. Once a hostage disappeared into Pakistan, finding him again became dramatically more difficult. Intelligence coverage became limited. Rescue opportunities almost vanished, and the chances of bringing him home alive dropped with every passing day. There was no time to waste. Our troop immediately shifted into mission planning. Intelligence analysts, surveillance specialists, communications personnel, and assault force leaders worked around the clock to build the clearest possible picture of the objective. Satellite imagery, aerial surveillance, intercepted communications, and human intelligence were combined piece by piece until we developed a workable plan. The timeline was compressed. Normally, operations like this benefited from days of preparation. This time, we had only hours. On the night of December 8th, we climbed aboard our helicopters and lifted off from our forward operating base. The aircraft carried us deep into hostile territory, flying low across the mountains to reduce the risk of enemy detection. After several hours in the air, we landed roughly 5 kilometers from the target compound. From that point forward, the helicopters disappeared, and the mission belonged entirely to us. We stepped into the darkness, adjusted our equipment one final time, confirmed radio checks, and began the infiltration. Most units would have approached the compound through the valley floor. We deliberately chose a different route. Our assault plan was inspired by the tactics used decades earlier by naval special warfare operators during the Vietnam War. Instead of attacking from the obvious direction, we intended to approach from terrain the enemy considered nearly impossible to cross. According to our maps and reconnaissance photographs, the rear of the compound sat against a steep mountainside. That mountain became our avenue of approach. We climbed for hours across loose rock, narrow ledges, and unstable ground, while carrying full combat loads. Every man hauled his rifle, ammunition, communications gear, medical equipment, breaching tools, body armor, night vision goggles, water, and additional mission-essential equipment. The higher we climbed, the more difficult the terrain became. What aerial imagery could not reveal was just how unforgiving the mountainside actually was. Eventually, the slope became so steep that normal movement was impossible. Several sections required us to face the rock, carefully lowering ourselves from one level to another while maintaining control of our weapons and equipment. At certain points, we deployed our assault ladders simply to continue descending. We were essentially climbing down a cliff in complete darkness while trying to remain silent. Every unexpected obstacle consumed valuable time. By the time the last operator finally reached the base of the mountain, we had already fallen behind schedule. We moved into our final assault position and conducted one last equipment check. That was when I heard the first call to prayer echo across the valley. A few seconds later, I looked toward the eastern horizon. The darkness was beginning to fade. The first signs of daylight were appearing. That realization immediately changed the situation. Night had always been our greatest advantage. Our night vision equipment allowed us to dominate the battlefield while the enemy remained largely blind. Once the sun rose, that advantage would disappear, and our chances of being detected by enemy fighters throughout the valley would increase dramatically. There was no longer any room for delay. Our troop commander gave the signal. We were going in immediately. Nick Checky, our point man, stepped off first. Nobody questioned that decision. Nick was exactly the kind of operator every assault team wanted leading the stack. He was aggressive without losing discipline, calm under pressure, and completely committed to the mission. He possessed the rare ability to make difficult tactical decisions almost instinctively. I trusted him completely. As our formation closed the final distance toward the compound, every operator silently moved into his assigned sector of responsibility. The objective contained multiple buildings surrounded by walls and narrow passageways. Each assault element had its own target to clear simultaneously. Speed, surprise, and coordination would determine whether the hostage survived. My element, Echo Team, had been assigned to the building intelligence indicated was most likely holding Dr. Joseph. Every step brought us closer. Every second mattered. None of us spoke. We simply advanced through the darkness, knowing that within moments the mission would either succeed or erupt into one of the most violent close-quarters battles of our deployment. We had almost reached the objective when everything changed. A Taliban guard unexpectedly stepped out of the doorway carrying his rifle at the ready. For a split second, both sides recognized what was happening. Nick reacted first. Without hesitation, he engaged the guard with accurate fire while driving straight toward the entrance. There was no pause, no second-guessing, and no attempt to take cover. His aggression immediately seized the initiative and forced the enemy onto the defensive. The entire assault accelerated in an instant. By the time I adjusted my position to create enough separation in case I needed a clear field of fire, Nick had already pushed several yards ahead of me. That was who he was. He believed speed and violence of action saved lives, especially during hostage rescue missions where every second could determine whether the captive lived or died. The distance between us and the building disappeared almost immediately. As we reached the entrance, we encountered something none of us had ever seen during years of combat operations. The doorway had been sealed with multiple layers of heavy wool blankets that had been cemented directly into the frame. Instead of using a normal door, the enemy had created a thick barrier designed to block visibility, slow an assault force, and absorb incoming rounds. Rounds had already been fired outside. Every delay increased the risk that the hostage would be executed. Hostage rescue leaves no room for hesitation. The moment the enemy realizes an assault force has arrived, They may decide they have nothing left to lose. If they kill the hostage before we reach him, the mission has already failed regardless of what happens afterward. Several of us grabbed the blankets and tried to rip them free. They did not move. The material had been secured so well that brute force accomplished almost nothing. Seconds continued slipping away. Over the radio and through the chaos, I heard our troop chief yelling for us to get inside immediately. His voice cut through the confusion. "Move! Get inside now!" He understood exactly what all of us were thinking. Although only a few seconds had passed, those seconds felt like an eternity. Finally, Nick forced his way through the opening, pushing the heavy blankets aside just enough to squeeze inside. Gunfire erupted almost immediately from somewhere deeper within the room. The blankets made it nearly impossible to see. They snagged our rifles, body armor, communications cables, magazines, and night vision goggles as we fought to push through the narrow opening. Every movement became awkward, and every delay increased the danger. The instant I broke through the entrance, I stepped over what I believed was either a body or discarded equipment lying on the floor. My responsibility was the left side of the room. I swung my rifle toward that sector. The moment my sights settled, I saw an armed Taliban fighter roughly 20 feet away raising his weapon directly toward me. Training took over. There was no time to think. I fired controlled, accurate shots into his head before he could complete his movement. He collapsed where he stood. The difference between him firing first or me firing first was measured in fractions of a second. As that threat fell, movement immediately caught my attention. Another individual was crawling rapidly across the floor toward several weapons lying nearby. I closed the distance as fast as I could and drove him to the ground before he reached them. Dropping my weight onto his shoulders, I pinned him firmly beneath my knees while keeping my rifle under control. Inside the room, visibility remained poor. Using my night vision goggles, I tried to identify who I had pinned. Throughout the struggle, he continued reaching desperately toward the weapons. At that moment, I still could not determine whether he was an enemy fighter attempting one last attack or a terrified hostage reacting to complete confusion. Nobody was speaking. Gunfire echoed through the building. Operators were clearing adjoining rooms. The entire objective had erupted into organized violence, and every decision had to be made instantly. Someone began shouting for Dr. Joseph. Again and again, members of our team called his name, hoping he would answer. For several tense moments, there was only silence. Then I finally heard a voice. "I'm over here! I'm over here!" The voice came from somewhere to my right. It was not the man struggling beneath me. That single realization forced an immediate decision. The person pinned underneath me was still resisting, still reaching toward weapons, and still represented an immediate threat to both the hostage and my teammates. I fired, eliminating the danger. Without wasting another second, I sprang across the room toward the voice. As I reached Dr. Joseph, rounds were still cracking through the building. I wrapped my arms around him and pulled him against my body, using my ballistic armor to shield him from incoming fire. Almost immediately, I saw another Taliban fighter within arm's reach. Unable to release the hostage, I reached out with my free hand, grabbed the fighter by the throat, and slammed him against the wall, pinning him there with everything I had. For several long seconds, I was controlling both men at once. One arm protected Dr. Joseph. The other prevented the enemy fighter from attacking. Fortunately, those few seconds gave the rest of my team enough time to fight their way into the room. The operators behind me immediately engaged the remaining threat with precise fire. Within moments, the room fell silent. The enemy had been eliminated. Dr. Joseph was alive. The objective we had crossed mountains to reach had finally been secured. But the operation was far from over. The first priority was making sure Dr. Joseph was actually safe. Combat has a way of creating chaos that can fool even experienced operators. Just because the shooting had stopped inside that room did not mean the danger was over. Enemy fighters could still be hiding elsewhere in the compound. Explosives could have been planted, and the hostage himself could have been rigged with an improvised explosive device without even knowing it. I quickly asked him if he had been hit. He looked exhausted, disoriented, and dehydrated, but he was conscious and able to answer our questions. We needed to know whether he could walk under his own power, or if we would have to carry him to the extraction point. Every additional minute inside the compound increased our exposure as daylight continued to spread across the valley. Another concern immediately came to mind. The Taliban had used suicide vests before. They had also rigged prisoners with grenades and hidden explosive devices beneath clothing to kill anyone attempting a rescue. We couldn't assume Dr. Joseph was clear simply because he appeared unharmed. Our explosive ordnance disposal specialist moved in and conducted a rapid assessment while we maintained security around the room. Every pocket, every layer of clothing, and every piece of equipment was checked carefully. Fortunately, nothing dangerous was found. Only then did we begin moving him toward the exit. The entire assault inside that building had lasted only a matter of minutes. From the moment we crossed the threshold until the last threat was eliminated, everything happened with incredible speed. 5 Taliban fighters had been killed, the hostage had been recovered alive, and every operator immediately transitioned to preparing for extraction before additional enemy forces could react. Outside the compound, the sky was becoming brighter with every passing minute. First light had arrived. That meant local fighters throughout the valley would soon be able to observe our movement. The longer we remained on the objective, the greater the chance that enemy reinforcements would organize a counterattack or begin engaging our landing zone with machine guns and rocket-propelled grenades. We moved Dr. Joseph toward the designated security position while the rest of the troop established a defensive perimeter. As I scanned the area, something caught my attention. Several operators were gathered around Nick. At first, I hoped he had only been wounded. Then I saw the urgency in everyone's movements. Without hesitation, I asked another teammate to assume responsibility for protecting Dr. Joseph, and I ran toward Nick's position. Our United States Air Force pararescue men were already working on him when I arrived. I immediately dropped beside them and began helping. Training took over. We conducted a rapid head-to-toe trauma assessment, searching for every wound while controlling massive bleeding and protecting his airway. Medical supplies were opened almost as fast as we could reach for them. Tourniquets, dressings, airway equipment, intravenous access, and emergency medications all came out within seconds. Then I saw the injury. Nick had suffered a devastating gunshot wound to the head. None of us wanted to accept what we already suspected. Still, nobody stopped working. That is one of the unwritten rules among Special Operations warriors. As long as there is even the smallest possibility of saving a teammate, you fight for him with everything you have. Soon we heard the familiar sound of helicopter rotors approaching our extraction zone. The aircraft settled onto the landing area while the security teams continued watching every ridgeline surrounding the compound. We loaded the casualty, helped Dr. Joseph aboard, and climbed into the aircraft ourselves. The moment the helicopter lifted off, everyone immediately returned to treating Nick. The flight back lasted roughly 40 minutes. Not one of those minutes was wasted. We established additional intravenous access using intraosseous devices when necessary, administered life-saving interventions, monitored his condition continuously, and rotated through cardiopulmonary resuscitation whenever required. Every operator aboard that aircraft was determined to give Nick every possible chance to survive. Nobody talked about giving up. Nobody accepted the idea that he was already gone. We simply kept working. When we finally landed at the military hospital at Bagram Airfield, the medical team was already waiting. They immediately took over his care. We watched as doctors and nurses rushed him inside while we stood there covered in dirt, sweat, blood, and exhaustion. A short time later, the physicians returned with the news none of us wanted to hear. Nick had died from his injuries. His wound had been catastrophic, and despite every effort made on the battlefield, during the flight, and inside the hospital, there was nothing more anyone could have done. Hearing those words hit every one of us like a punch to the chest. Only minutes earlier, he had been leading the assault exactly as he always did. Fearless, aggressive, and completely committed to rescuing an American citizen. Now he was gone. Even knowing the outcome, I have never questioned the effort we made to save him. We owed him that fight. Every teammate deserves every possible chance to come home. That mission became one of the most recognized special operations hostage rescue missions of the global war on terrorism. Several members of the task force received decorations for extraordinary heroism. Nick Checky was posthumously awarded the Navy Cross, while other operators received the Bronze Star Medal with Valor and additional awards recognizing their actions during the assault. Years later, I was presented with the Medal of Honor for my role in that operation. People often ask what it feels like to receive the nation's highest military decoration. The truth is that I have never viewed it as something that belongs only to me. No one accomplishes anything alone in combat. Every decision I made that morning was possible only because my teammates were doing their jobs beside me. Nick's courage at the front of the assault, the precision of every operator clearing the compound, the skill of our medics, the professionalism of our aviation crews, and the sacrifice of every man on that mission made success possible. Whenever I hold that medal in my hands, my thoughts never remain on myself. They immediately return to Clark Schwedler. They return to the warriors we lost aboard Extortion 17. They return to Nick Checky, whose courage carried our assault forward until his final breath. Their sacrifice made it possible for me to stand where I stood that morning. Their legacy is the true reason that medal exists. Receiving the Medal of Honor changed my life, but not in the way most people imagine. Many people see the medal and think of personal achievement. They picture victory, recognition, or the highest level of military success. I have never looked at it that way. When I look at that medal, I do not see myself. I see the faces of men who never came home. I remember Clark Schwedler, whose death years earlier pushed me to pursue a higher level of service. I remember every teammate we lost aboard Extortion 17. I remember Nick Checky charging through the doorway without hesitation, fully aware that every second counted if we were going to save an innocent American. Those memories carry far more weight than any ceremony ever could. The medal may bear my name, but it represents the sacrifice of an entire generation of warriors. Combat teaches you something that is difficult to explain to people who have never experienced it. No mission is ever accomplished by one individual. Every successful operation depends on dozens, sometimes hundreds, of people working together with complete trust. Intelligence analysts spend countless hours identifying the target. Pilots risk their lives flying through hostile airspace. Mechanics keep aircraft mission ready. Communications specialists ensure every radio functions properly. Medics prepare for casualties before the first shot is fired. Every operator on the assault force accepts responsibility not only for his own life, but also for the lives of every teammate beside him. The public often remembers one name attached to a medal. The men who wear the uniform remember the entire team. That hostage rescue was no different. Our success came from disciplined planning, relentless rehearsals, decisive leadership, and the willingness of every operator to place the mission ahead of himself. We trusted one another completely because that trust had been forged through years of deployments, demanding training, and shared sacrifice. When the citation for the Medal of Honor describes my actions, I understand why those events are highlighted. But I also understand something equally important. None of those actions would have been possible if Nick had not led the assault. None of them would have happened if my teammates had not continued clearing rooms while I protected Dr. Joseph. None of them would have mattered if our aviation crews had failed to deliver us to the objective or extract us under increasing daylight. Every chapter of that operation belonged to the entire troop. That is why I often say I am not the owner of the medal. I am only its temporary caretaker. One day it will outlive me, just as it has outlived the men who earned it before my generation. My responsibility is to preserve what it truly represents and ensure future Americans understand the cost behind those words engraved on its ribbon. The Medal of Honor is not about fame. It is not about politics. It is not about becoming recognizable. It represents courage under impossible circumstances, unwavering loyalty to your teammates, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for someone else. Those principles have always defined the finest members of the United States Armed Forces. Throughout our nation's history, ordinary Americans have stepped forward during extraordinary moments. Farmers, mechanics, teachers, college students, factory workers, and construction laborers have put on the uniform and accepted responsibilities far greater than themselves. They came from different backgrounds, spoke with different accents, and held different beliefs. Yet they all swore the same oath to defend the Constitution of the United States against every enemy, foreign and domestic. Many never returned home. Their sacrifice purchased freedoms that millions of Americans enjoy every single day without ever seeing the battles that protected them. That reality deserves to be remembered. I have also learned that courage is often misunderstood. People think courage means acting without fear. Combat teaches the opposite. Every man experiences fear. Fear keeps you alert. Fear reminds you that mistakes have consequences. The difference lies in whether you allow fear to control your decisions. Professional warriors acknowledge fear, manage it, and continue accomplishing the mission regardless of the danger standing in front of them. That lesson extends far beyond the battlefield. Every generation faces its own challenges. Some confront combat. Others battle personal hardship, tragedy, uncertainty, or failure. The same principles still apply: discipline, integrity, commitment, selfless service, the willingness to keep moving forward when every instinct tells you to quit. Those values shaped every stage of my military career, from the first day I entered training to my final combat deployment. If people remember anything about my story, I hope it is not the medal. I hope they remember the men whose names receive far less attention. I hope they remember Clark Schwedler. I hope they remember the heroes of Extortion 17. I hope they remember Nick Checky and every operator who willingly stepped into danger to rescue a fellow American they had never even met. Those men represent the very best of our country. Serving beside them was the greatest honor of my life. Their legacy continues to inspire me every single day. And everything I do now is dedicated to ensuring that future generations understand the price they paid in defense of freedom. That is the true meaning of service. That is the responsibility every warrior carries long after the fighting ends. And that is the legacy I will spend the rest of my life protecting.